And maybe it's also worth explaining to people that it's a form of body work, but it's quite a subtle form of body work. So maybe talk a bit about that.
Sure. So it was developed by Marion Rosen, who's 95, and she's living in Berkeley, California now. And she grew up in Germany. She was a young woman in the Nazi era, and she was Jewish. So it was very difficult for her to do anything at that time because it was when the Jews were starting to be persecuted. But she was trained by a bunch of avant-garde analysts and therapists, one who was a Jungian psychotherapist, and his wife Lucy Hayer. And she would do breath work and body work with his clients before they went in for analysis. And they found that by helping people to relax and let go of their physical tension and allow their breath to be relaxed and deep, as opposed to when people are kind of hyperventilating or very nervous, they tend to be quite tense here and their breath is short and rapid, and that often keeps people more in their head. They're kind of afraid to drop in. As you drop in more, which is similar to meditative states that people do when they meditate, you can go more deeply into your maybe your higher consciousness or whatever you want to call it. And then they would have the analysis, and they found that people were able to go more deeply into their analysis, and therefore they weren't skipping over anything, but they were able to go to become well, in inverted commas, more quickly. She then went and trained as a physiotherapist in Sweden, and then worked as a physiotherapist in America. They call it a physical therapist. And for years she just worked as a physical therapist, treating people physically, treating their injuries. And then I think when she was in her 50s, she started to incorporate not only what she'd observed and learnt when she was working in Germany, but I suppose that had triggered a curiosity in her, which had never left her. So she'd been observing things about her clients while she was working physically. And she started to allow her kind of interest into her sessions. And what happened was that some people who always came back with recurrent back problems, for example, so they'd get fixed, but then they would have to come back, they started not to need to come back.
Yeah.
Or people who had injuries that weren't healing and there was no reason for them not to heal, they started to heal. So people were interested and said, "What is it that you're doing?" She said, I'm not doing anything special. And they said, well, will you show us what you're doing? So this is how the training started. And then it broadened, that she wasn't just working with people that had injuries. She was working to help people prevent injuries in the first place, and partly how she did that was by developing a system of movement. So we have a movement training as well. But also people would come to her maybe if they were at a crossroads in their life and they were unsure about what to do next, or if they were a bit depressed, or if they were having marriage problems, or if they were having trouble conceiving. They would just come to her and see if there was something that was going on in their unconscious that was affecting their physical life, and so that they could be happier. And so this is how the work's developed. So people come for all kinds of reasons. They come because they want to have a better relationship with their bodies. A lot of us treat our bodies as an object. So we might go to the gym, but really we're treating it as an object still. And then we might fast, or we do all these things, but we don't really listen to what our body wants to say.
We kind of do things to it.
We do things,
rather than listen to what it's trying to communicate to us.
And what I've found is when you listen to what your body has to say, it has a superb intelligence. And this is why we always say in Rosen that the body doesn't lie, because when we're giving a session, we can feel from the response in people's bodies, from the way that their muscles let go or tighten, from the way the breath deepens into their body or becomes more rapid, the way their faces change, the experiences that they have. The body can't really fake that. You can't decide to fake a big twitch in your back. So we learn to follow these clues, and we learn to listen really to what the body wants to say. And I always say it's your body's your best friend.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I found interesting was you would pick up something that was happening in my body, and then you would draw my attention to it. And through that would often allow a deepening of the experience, because I would then be able to come in contact with what was happening there. And also you mentioned the breath, and I was interested more about that as well, because again, in my experience, you asked me, I think at one point I was kind of doing yoga breathing in a session. That would be my tendency through, years of practicing yoga, that if I would be relaxing, I would breathe in a certain way. But there was still a certain doing to that. And it was interesting to me how you brought my attention to that. So I'm curious as to the role of the breath in it.
It's interesting because when people really let go and the diaphragm is really relaxed, and the diaphragm is the muscle inside us, very involved with our breathing. When people really experience that relaxing as opposed to working, so when you're doing a breath, even if it's a kind of a good breath that you do in yoga, you're still using a lot of effort, you're still very much in control. When you completely surrender and the body has this kind of surrendered feeling, people often feel as though they're in the hands of God. That's how it feels. And people, you know, who don't believe in God, maybe they would express it differently. But a lot of people who don't believe in God, that's how it feels to them. It's this kind of safety, it's this trust, as though you're being held by the universe or connected with the universe. And it's a wonderful feeling. So, and out of that wonderful feeling, miracles happen. People's lives really change, and that's why it's so fascinating, because when we come into connection with ourselves in that way, our lives change. And so it's fascinating as a practitioner to see all the changes in people's lives, and often very little changes. I mean, I had a very beautiful girl coming to me, and we had a session, and I think she said to me later that she'd gone out and she'd worn red lipstick for the first time ever, and she had a really beautiful mouth, but before she'd always kind of felt self-conscious, and now she could actually have a bit of fun with looking. So I thought that was it really touched me that she did that, because she was this beautiful girl but she never really wanted anyone to notice her. And so little things like this can then have a huge impact on the way somebody's living their life.
Well, from what you're talking about, which I think is also very interesting, that you're talking about allowing things to happen through really making contact with ourselves, and then allowing things to come out of that, rather than an efforting and a doing. And that seems to be quite a key underlying belief within what you're doing. Yes,
and I think that's also very humbling, because often in life we think we know what's best for people. Or we think if only they did this, they'd be fixed, or they'd be better. And I think in Rosen, we always say we don't want anything for our clients, but actually that's not true. Of course, we want them to have the best for themselves that they can have. But we don't know what that is. We might think we know, but actually they're the only ones that really know. And they know when they get into connection with this part of themselves that often we've learnt to put away.
Yeah, well, it sounds like a distinction between perhaps what they think they want and what they actually on a deeper level need.
Yes.
And it sounds like part of what's happening is people are being supported in contacting that deeper expression. But something else I wanted to ask you about as well was, you used I think it was the term peaceful touch when I spoke to you about this previously, and I was curious to hear more about that, of touch in a way which is subtle but is also very powerful.